This is going to be a short rant on why I just don't think that small map pools with old maps work, okay? It's going to be, hopefully, it's going to be really short. The first thing I just want to say is that old maps are boring and they're overplayed and it's gotten to the point where they all play the exact same way and it's not nearly as fun as it used to be to play them, right? I want to note that these problems exist mostly in a vacuum. If you have five maps that have all been overplayed and all been played in the past and been stratted for the last half a decade, over half a decade in the case of next gen and GD3, then obviously it's even more boring to play them if all the maps you've played already have set strategies and set ways to play. The response to this is that people is like, oh, but we come up with new strategies. Okay, that's bullshit. Nobody has come up with a new strategy and a new way to play next gen since 2015. We know that there's a best way to play next gen. We know that there's a best way to play GD3. When you focus on old maps, you remove a lot of the nuance that comes with CTW in and of itself, right? A big part of CTW is being able to outpace your opponents and be able to play around them based on whatever strategy they're doing, right? This was very clear in the way teams played Wooly. When every team knows exactly what the other team is capable of doing, when every map has been played so much that you can predict the way people are going to play in the beginning with their splits and predict their rotation, then it doesn't become about those macro level strategies anymore and macro level decision making. It rather becomes about the small differences in how you take team fights and how you set up infrastructure and stuff, and perhaps how you rotate, but maybe not. The problem with that is that sorry, that just I mean, I already said it. It removes all the nuance. It just changes the way people play CTW. Okay? And I could make a video on the projection of the CTW meta or whatever, but I just think in general it's not a good way we're going when we're focusing on microplay rather than macro play, because it makes everything a lot more boring and it makes everything a lot more inherently random. Why is that? Because a lot of the microplay that exists in the game is problematic and buggy and is not rewarding, and I'll explain that later. Team fights, while there's a lot of nuance in how you take team fights, in general it's dictated by a few things that can be easily manipulated and easily and is random within the game of MC itself, right? Things like KB and ping and whether you get knocked in the void, how much knockback you take from arrows, whether the other team is blatantly cheating, right? Or just cheating in general. All these kinds of things are exacerbated when every single everything, all the outcome of the match is determined on these kinds of things, but also the outcome of all of the maps is determined on these kinds of things, right? You're just gonna be like, okay, Matt, but every single map, no matter what map, whether it's new or old, will always require you to be good at team fighting and be able to take good fights and whatever, right? Okay, I don't think that's necessarily true, but even if it is true, it is you're less likely to reach a point where everything is reliant on team fighting if there's actual nuances in strategy and there's ways to play maps that other teams haven't figured out, or you have an understanding of the map that is better than the other team, right? Maps like Next Gen and GD3 will never have this kind of thing among the top teams because top teams know how to play it, and it just becomes about who has more cheaters on their team. That is literally it, and it's really frustrating. That's that. Old maps are boring. Old maps have obvious playstyles, and the problems in the mechanics of the video game itself, rather than the game mode or the teams, make the game really frustrating to play and make the game very repetitive. That's the first part. My second part is on innovation. It took Next Gen an entire year to come to the point where it was playable. It was proposed in Guardians of the Wool and in September 2013 or 2014, and it was totally different then, and it became a good map in a complete year after, in Age of Ares, where it turned into the 2-lane void style that we have now, in late 2015 2015 during Age of, or late 2014, I forget, in Age of Aries, 1 year later. It took a full year of rigorous testing that was on and off, by the way, because halfway through there was a giant DTC tournament, and it took a lot of time and energy and a lot of testing from teams to have that map reach the point it was. Notably, that map didn't look like or play like any of the other maps in the map pool, and because of that, there was a lot of disagreement within the community whether it was good or not, and teams initially did not like it. Notably, this is the exact same as the way a lot of the new maps currently play, right? When a lot of new teams see new maps now, they think it's pretty bad, and they compare it to maps like GD3 Next Gen, which have been being played for 7-8 years, and they go like, oh, it's not as good as these two maps, so we ought to play the older maps regardless, right? I think that makes map makers make their new maps look like old maps but reskin versions, which I think is inherently problematic because it means you're never going to get the kind of innovation that pushes good maps, like good new ideas forward in the way that we got in Wooly, where we got like maps like We Sell Mushrooms, maps like Fun Guy, which like had new gameplay styles that we hadn't seen before. But also it just like, why? You're just wasting my fucking time if you're telling me that I have to make a map that looks exactly like Next Gen but reskinned, and it just makes map makers not want to make maps, okay? There's a lot of problems with that inherently, okay? If you're not letting map makers do their thing, you're just gonna not get map makers, and you're just gonna get the same shit over again, and you're not going to be able to come up with new maps, you're not gonna be able to edit old maps, whatever, right? The second thing, though, is just that I think if we're going to make CTW more accessible, and if we're going to get it to a new stage and make it better than it is now, we just need to stop focusing on old maps. Like, I'm so fucking tired of people telling me that Dharma ought not to be played just because it doesn't play the same way I would like Next Gen to play, right? And it's bad because it's too control heavy, or it's bad because you like get bowed too much. Like, these are bullshit arguments that that rely on the assumption that Next Gen is the gold standard of the way we should play CTW, and that just isn't true. Like, there are tons of different ways to play tons of different maps, and while certain mechanics are definitely inherently frustrating, things like fireballs, things like a lot of TNT, the way we design maps should not be based on the way we design old maps, and map pools in and of themselves should not dictate how we design maps, right? That's I guess the third part of this. I know this is just a shit rant, whatever. When you make a map pool small, you force it, like, the community is obviously going to want to prefer the old maps because they know the old maps, they know they play well, and they want to play them. But also that just means there's no room for new maps. Like, as a map maker, you're not going to want to create new maps if you know that there's like 7 new maps, or there's only 3 new maps, and only one of them is going to be picked for the 5 map pool because the 4 other maps that were created 7 years ago are going to be prioritized no matter what. Whether they are good or not doesn't matter. It just matters that map has clout because it's been played so much. That's really frustrating because it doesn't make map makers want to make new maps, and doesn't make old players want to play those new maps and test them out, right? Because there's already an old map pool. Just play the old maps, right? This is really problematic for obvious reasons, okay? So just a quick recap. Old maps are boring, and they're even more boring in a vacuum where all the maps are old. And when we don't have innovation, like when we have a small map pool and when we focus on old maps, we don't get innovation, and innovation is very important. Last little thing on why innovation is very important, and CW in general. I think, like, I already kind of explained this before, but I think CW's kind of hit a point where, like, it's turned into more microplay, and I think that's fine, but microplay is inherently more random, inherently prone to cheaters, and like shit like that. And I think that's very frustrating for it's just frustrating inherently because people tend to hackuzate and people tend to cheat themselves. But it's also annoying because it's really hard for teams to differentiate themselves and show their different qualities when you're forcing teams to play a certain way into a certain play style. I think Wooly did a really good job of not having that happen, because every single week there was a new meta, because a team came up with a new strategy that was better than the old one that countered the new strategy. I think that made it more fun because there was more of a reason to play, and for players who were bored of the old maps, but there was also reason to play for players who wanted to win and didn't like the new maps anyways, because they were forced to like think about the maps and like relearn them and study how other teams play the maps, right? Now it's not like that. Now it's just a bunch of shit posters sitting at observers and shit talking you when you lose a 1v1. And it doesn't really matter how the flow of the match goes, because we already know how every single map plays, and we already know how every single map ought to play if we were playing it perfectly, and we try to reach that standard. It's really frustrating because it takes away from the way CTW, it takes away from a lot of the interesting parts of CTW, and it takes away a lot of what makes good teams good. I don't want CTW to become this insular thing where, like RMCT, where everything is about preserving the old guard and preserving the old maps and like shit like this, when we could always just make CTW better into something that it hasn't been but should be or could be. There's a lot of problems with the game in and of itself that prevent the game from ever becoming to the point we probably want it to be, but I think maps are the best way to achieve something that is competitive and varied and different, and we're only going to ever get that if we promote map makers making these kinds of maps, and we're not going to do that when we have 5 maps, when we have Gobi, Next Gen, and GD3 in the map pool out of 5 maps, and we're definitely not going to do that if people keep baby raging when new maps get played and don't focus on making the new maps good. That's the end of my rant. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.